conversation opener written on a piece of paper, but there's actually a little bit more meaning behind why I decided to show you these two sheets of paper, because you understood exactly what I was trying to say and the idea behind what I was trying to say without me using any vocalization or any body gestures, nothing, just written symbols on a piece of paper. And all of you, whether you responded or not, in the back of your head was getting the idea behind what I was trying to say. And what I just showed you an example was our own written visual communication, our own alphabet. And our verbal communication is used every day, and we recognize it as the English alphabet. But, I mean, everybody in the world will, to my understanding, uses some form of written visual communication, and everybody in this classroom is using it one way or another. For example, there might be somebody on their phone, probably not, because Shushka made it clear she does not want to on her phone, but somebody at one point in this class checked their phone to either read a text message or send a text message, and by doing so, you are participating in the use of our alphabet by sending these symbols. Like, the person you're sending it to, the person that sent you a message, and in no way has any idea, like, knows what you're saying, but can't hear you say it or can't see you act it out, but they still understand the message. And that is extremely important in everybody's lives. I mean, they can't even begin to describe how important it is, whether you're landing a new job by writing a resume, or you're writing down the grade that I am receiving for this speech right now. You are using some form of visual communication. And it pretty much structures our whole civilization, and without it, we are, like, how could we communicate long distance, or how could we write things down, how could we record a history without any of it? But the thing is each and every one of us go throughout our days, and there's so many people that go throughout their days and just accept that the alphabet that we have right now is just the way it's been, and the way it is. Like, that's, everybody does that. And nobody really ever ponders. I don't know, maybe you do, that might be extremely random, but you just don't ponder, like, where it came from, like, how it started. And that is what I'm going to talk about today, is the history of written visual communication, or alphabets. Okay, so to begin, the alphabet began in Egypt, and it began in Egypt around the year 2000 BC. They had a set of 22 hieroglyphics. Now, this doesn't really look like a typical alphabet, because what the Egyptians used were considered logograms, which they never really excited speech from their alphabet. It was usually meant to, like, describe and kind of, like, sound out things, but it wasn't like they wouldn't send a text message with an eagle and bird, so they wouldn't write down to someone like, oh, read this. Like, it was more like to describe things, or like to show objects, or to, like, it wasn't described as like a conversation like that would have been. Like, that's just not how it worked. But that's why it wasn't the first true alphabet. It was the spark of the beginning of an alphabet, but it wasn't a true alphabet. And eventually it started to evolve around 1700 BC, when they began to start using consonants and vowels and assimilating, but not at the same time. They used consonants and some contained vowels, but they weren't really assimilated as a full language. But it was used by proto-Sinaitic script, which was used by the common workers to be able to communicate between one another. And that is the first spark of the alphabet began there. And that was when everything started to really change, because as the course of history runs, things, ideas, people, we all begin to change. And that's what happened when the Phoenician alphabet became. And the Egyptian alphabet sparked this Phoenician alphabet, and it was the first major phonemic script. And it contained only about 24 letters, and these were the letters that they used, and they meant various very random things. but I can't really understand, but at the time it was used to phonemically pronounce words, which is why the Phoenician alphabet had two very, very important benefits. Because it only contained about 24 letters instead of about 100 different symbols, it was easy for common traders to learn. So it became more universal. So it wasn't just royalty learning languages, learning to write things down and commute in a written verbal communication. It was everybody. So everyone began. And it could be used to write different languages down phonetically. So you could using this language, because you had to sound things out, you could write down other languages and you could start to begin to understand other things through the use of this phonetics. And this was close to the first true alphabet, but not quite. Actually, the first true alphabet sparked with the Greeks. The Greeks modified the Phoenician language and turned it into a language called Latin. And if any of you guys took Latin in high school, I am sorry. I did too, and that class is not easy. A lot of conjugation. But, as you can see, their written alphabet is beginning to look like ours. It like shares similar letters, well, actually the same letters for the most part, if you took advanced Latin. But this is incredible because it marks the first true alphabet, which it incorporates both consonants and vowels into the sound. So basically now you can start to have full conversations by written down lectures, and things weren't just used to describe objects and places. It was more used to actually have a conversation and to like send a letter to someone, so someone can be like, "Oh, how are you doing?" And another person can be like, "I'm doing great," instead of just like, "The sun sets here at this." Conversing through written languages became more relevant. And because of this, the Romans actually adopted Latin too. And because at the time the Roman Empire was vastly expanding everywhere. And because of this, Latin was spread all over Europe. And with this huge spread of the Latin language, the Romance languages became the start. Because, well, the Latin is, all the Romance languages are derived from Latin, and which is why the letters that you see right here represent our English letters, like the T, the A, the B, all of it's, and that's for the Romance languages like Spanish, French, even the language we speak today, all derived from Latin, which is when the whole world just began to burst out in different, like, it caused like a chain reaction, basically, and caused for the evolution of so many different languages. And that, I mean, you gotta understand that it's like, what started out as just pictures, like an eagle describing, used for A or a foot, and described to, like, pictures to describe things and not to converse. It began with this to the modern text message, to the modern resume. All throughout everything we do today, we use some sort of written, visual communication. And it's just immensely important, and it's not, and I think it's just as important to understand its roots, to be able to understand other languages, and to understand our language itself, and to really get down to the roots of something that we use every day and we take for granted as a typical, oh hey, I just know it because I had to know it in first grade, instead of actually understanding why you have to know it. So I just think that's fascinating. And if you're a history major, you will too. If not, I still think it's great. And that concludes